Righty, let's get started. Hi, everyone. Good evening. So welcome to next panel session on how technology and AI can help reduce Scope 3 emissions. My name is Charlotte Bullard Davies. I lead the primary research team at Economist Impact, and I'm joined today by Valentin Jahn, who's the Deputy Director of Research and Operations at TPI Global Climate Transition Center at LSE at the London School of Economics, as well as Laetitia Carle, who's the Chief Operating Officer and Managing Director of France of Greenly. So there have been a lot of conversations over the past couple of days about AI. So for today's session, we really want to kind of keep it a little bit more grounded and practical, and talk about the practical applications, like I said, for Scope 3. So both from the assessment, measurement, and also the actual reduction side of things. So I think to get us started, maybe Valentin, you can kick us off. When it comes to assessments and disclosures, where have you kind of found the strongest practical applications of AI, and what are some of maybe the risks that you're seeing? Kick it off.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you for the invitation to be here. As you said, I'm Valentin Jahn from the TPI Global Transition Center, and we look at the progress that entities are making in the low carbon transition for both companies, countries, and also for banks. And we do it in two ways. One of them is quantitative, where we estimate company transition pathways and we compare that with low carbon scenarios. And then the other one is qualitative, where we measure in a binary yes/no indicator way the management practices that companies, countries, and banks are putting in place. So within that, where does AI sit? On the more qualitative side, we're using AI to understand whether companies' disclosures meet certain criteria in our scoring, and I can talk a little bit into what are the specific issues we see there. And then on the carbon accounting side, where we look at the alignment of corporate transition pathways, we particularly look also at Scope 3. Maybe starting with Scope 3, the way that we use AI at the moment is if you want to scale these kind of assessments, you have to run them on very large databases. At that point, you're no longer certain whether the information that companies are providing is accurate. So at that point, we use I wouldn't call them sort of deep learning AI models, but more machine learning models to actually understand whether the data is reliable. And that's very, very helpful. And ground truth data, and having, I think that was mentioned before, having that level of certainty is extremely important to then extrapolate to the larger data sets and understand whether the data makes sense. On the company, sort of on the more qualitative side, where you're looking through, unstructured data in terms of company reports, and you're trying to understand whether a certain text passage meets the criteria of a certain indicator. Let's say, does the company have a policy to link climate change performance to executive remuneration? That's where we use LLMs, so generative AI. And that's also where I think the key issue is accountability. So you don't actually know how the models produce the output that they produce. You can't necessarily go back and explain exactly what's happening. And we've done quite a bit of work there and sort of, how to combine more closely what analysts are doing with the AI pipeline that they're using and being able to follow specifically each step.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And I think one of the things you mentioned just now is maybe some of the applications of different models as well. And I wonder, Laetitia, if that's something that you can talk about what Greenly's doing and how maybe the practical applications and evolution of different AI models, come into play for what Greenly's doing.
Sure. So Greenly, for your context, we are the leading sustainability management platform. And we support companies with measuring their emissions, their product level carbon footprints, manage their ESG data, and also all the topics on supply chain. And so to your question, indeed, on Scope 3 and the concrete application of AI, for us, the rise of AI has been a great opportunity to make carbon management more accessible to companies. So we started as a company serving SMBs, and SMBs, they don't really know about carbon footprints, your supplier, your supply chain, they're not as mature as are the big companies. So they need to be taught, they need to become experts. And so that's our mission at Greenly, is really to make them experts in carbon, and AI helps a lot on this. So on practical way, decarbonation happens in the scope 3 at product level. So it's great to know what is the company carbon footprint of your suppliers, but it's not really relevant for you. What's relevant for you is what is the carbon footprint of the product that I'm buying. And that's where you can really have an impact if those products becomes less and less carbonated. And so LCA, life cycle analysis, which is the assessment of the carbon footprint of a product, used to be something very bespoke, very precise work done by consultants, etc. So great work, but hard to replicate and hard to do times 1,000. The problem is that today we need to do it times 1,000. We need to do it massively at scale to engage all of the supply chains. And so that's where AI helps. And so on being very practical, because it may be a bit simplest, but that's how the suppliers will understand it. It's building LCA models, those models that used to be built especially for one product. Now we can use Gen AI to build a model adapted to a product category. We can also harmonize the data and make sure that there is consistency between the methodologies used, between various suppliers, so you can make the right choices. You can engage your suppliers. You can tell them, the others are doing this, you should do this too. And then you can also match the emission factors. So carbon footprint is really finding an activity and finding how you translate that into carbon. And you need to have this emission factor to convert an activity to carbon. And there are thousands of emission factors out there. And you need to find the right one for the activity that you're assessing. So AI can help with that. Then, of course, there's the error finding and missing hypothesis, because the problem with carbon management is that oftentimes you don't have the data. Your suppliers don't have the data, and so you need to make hypotheses. And so that's a place where AI helps a lot. And eventually, the project management of all of it, so engaging your supply chain at scale and orchestrating this data collection at high level. So those are how we use agentic AI to not just measure carbon footprint, but really build a supply chain carbon infrastructure to reduce the scope 3 of companies.
Yeah, no, I think that's very interesting. And I think one of the things you both mentioned just now is, of course, the application for AI to increase scale, right? But I think, one of the key risks that we talk about with scale is, losing some of the accountability, the human oversight, and that expertise to make sure, we're defending it against the risks of, for example, AI trying to game the system or give certain outcomes, desirable outcomes. So maybe can one or either of you talk a little bit about where you think it's important to have human oversight, or what the role people should be playing as part of these systems?
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that. And I think it's most prominent sort of in the case where you have text that you're trying to interpret and that you're scoring against a certain set of criteria. And the reason for that is that two things. AI or Gen AI output can be very plausible without necessarily being correct. And you can't necessarily trace back exactly how it came to its conclusion. And the second one is that that particularly where the text that is being used by companies is ambivalent or ambiguous. So that gray area is also where the models themselves tend to fail the most. That's what we're finding. Ultimately, if you think about it sort of from a London School of Economics point of view, we will publish something that has our name on it, that has the reputation of the London School of Economics on it, and our audience really trusts what we do. So if you're sort of coming back to that accountability point, if you're an analyst or a researcher looking through these disclosures, you're making these decisions on the basis of AI output, you can no longer guarantee to the user that that's actually accurate. And there's some ways around it, and it sort of broadly falls in this category of explainable AI, but I think it's very difficult to do, and in particular, it's also expensive to do. So because either the researcher will spend a lot of time verifying the data that it's finding, which is almost as time intensive as actually kind of going out and doing the assessment yourself, or you develop a mechanism and a methodology to verify the model output such that you can actually go out and say, we trust this model. You can do this by, tracking sort of, quote unquote, human performance versus the AI performance over a certain period. You can also use other metrics to do that, but developing that is actually quite expensive and difficult. And maybe the last point is, it doesn't also necessarily guarantee that the same model and the same approach will work 2 years from now, because language evolves all the time. So the promise of scale is, really significant and could be really, really game changing. To do this well is very, very difficult. But a lot to do also has with the quality of the models that are coming out. So, if you ask me in a year from now, it might be a completely different answer, but that's sort of, where we are right now.
Yeah. And I may add that I completely agree that human oversight is necessary, and we always offer human services on top of the platform at Greenly. But what we find also is that the more you work, there are human mistakes as well, and so AI makes mistakes, but human makes mistakes too, and AI can spot those mistakes. So it's something that we have seen a lot in our customers, is that they struggle to find where there might have been mistakes, because there's so much data in a GHG report, there's so much work done by different teams, that you want somewhere where we can say, okay, this is a red flag, this is weird, are you sure of this data? And so that's something that technology allows to do. So yeah, in a way, it mitigates also the fact that sometimes it does mistakes, but sometimes it finds them too.
And I think, with the way that people are maybe less and less involved in, these kinds of like direct activities, what do you think the skills that people, in these systems should be thinking about for the future? I mean, have you, or think about reskilling or, where does that play a role when we talk about, okay, there needs to be some human oversight, maybe it's less than before, but yeah, just want to hear thoughts on skills for the future.
It's really focusing human energy where it brings more value. So there's a lot of things that can be automated, a lot of tasks that are repetitive, and these are all the things we want to automate. But we would need human to force the transition, because if you're a sustainability manager today, and I think that's the case of a lot of people here, your job is to convince, is to engage people in what you do, and so these are human skills. And if a sustainability manager today is stuck in his room with Excels all day and doing very basic work, they're not leading the transition. To lead the transition, you need to engage the company and change the way we do things, and you need to rely on data to drive this transition. But the human energy should be focused on this engagement.
Anything to add to that in terms of skills?
Yeah, I mean, I think culture is very important, to be open to experiment. I think thinking about research more broadly, I think it will change quite a lot. One of the things we're already finding is the speed at which we can iterate different versions of the, let's say, a research question, and we've defined a certain set of indicators for that. Indicators need to be comparable across different entities. That historically would have taken a lot of work. You basically have a one-shot experiment now, especially if you sort of create a system around how you can track that over time. You can iterate very quickly. So I think you can find more meaningful indicators much more quickly now. So I think that, there's sort of, how do we integrate this, and how do I make sure as a researcher I can sign this off on one hand, and then on the other hand, what kind of new avenues does that actually open for us, and how do we think about that very creatively?
Yeah, well, I think we all like to have the sense we will have jobs in the future. So, we've talked a little bit about kind of like the assessment measurement side of things, but Laetitia, I wonder if you can talk a little bit more about some of the potential applications of AI for actual like Scope 3 emissions reductions, what you think that looks like now and maybe what you hope that might look like in the future.
Yeah, so the Scope 3 reduction in the end is knowing what's in your Scope 3. So you cannot rely anymore on industry averages, etc. Because if you don't know exactly what are the activities in your Scope 3, you will not be able to reduce. So it goes through precision, and then it goes to having the right action plan. So once you have precisions, you know exactly what you need to change, and then to know what you need to change, you need to do some scenario modeling. Okay, so what if I get rid of this supplier? But that's not always an easy decision because, I mean, the business relies on its supply chain. So you cannot just say, okay, this one has a lot of carbon, so I just want it out of my Scope 3. And you just need that person or that business to engage in a strategy that's relevant to yours and that can help your own strategy. So to engage your supply chain, you need to be able to provide them with the tools. Because if you're a large company, you may have even sometimes someone working on this full time. That might not be the case of the suppliers, and so you need to show them what you're doing, to show them the example, to show them that it's possible for them with the tools that exist today. And scenario modeling, as I was saying, is something that you can only do if you do it at scale. Because if you do one static LCA, it's great, but you cannot really know what would happen if you change here and that. And so that's why you need those calculators to know, okay, so that product today is built that way, and that means X amount of carbon. And tomorrow, if I change this and that, what are the impacts? And how do I put that into a trajectory that makes sense with my client's trajectory? And so we can have like a motion that engages all of the ecosystem at once.
Can I just add
please
something?
do.
I would just say two things. For most sectors, Scope 3 or indirect emissions more broadly is the largest source of emissions. So it's really important to get a better grip on that. The second point is, if you use a non-sophisticated model to estimate Scope 3, you're not going to capture specifically those actions that will lead to reductions. So you're not even able to reward an upstream supplier to take certain measures because you just use some kind of average. You're not able to capture it. So getting that additional layer is really powerful.
Yeah. No, I think that, that makes a lot of sense. But, as you look forward to the future and think about more and more companies adopting these kinds of tools, do you expect that this will be something where organizations are committed to kind of sharing data on how tools are used, or will this be something that will increasingly become a competitive advantage?
Yeah, in my opinion, in a near future, every company would be measuring their carbon footprint and monitoring it and reducing it, and more precisely that of their product. And it might start with the product because that's where the pressure lies. The pressure is commercial, and at some point, if you lose your clients, you lose your business. And so regulations exist, but we've seen they can be shaky sometimes. So like the real pressure comes from the business. And so every business is going to report their emissions and monitor them, and will be forced to kind of improve those metrics. As today, we're doing financial accounting, and you have to publish it publicly. And so if you don't have good financial results, companies might decide not to work with you because it's too dangerous. And it's going to be exactly the same with carbon.
Yeah. And I think, thank you. I think one of the other things, like I said, there've been a lot of high-level conversations about AI through the last couple of days, and one of the things, of course, that's been brought up many times, but I am going to bring it up again for sure, is, of course, the emissions of AI itself, right?
And I think we have a question on this.
Oh, yeah. There we go. Someone read my mind. So I'll use this exact verbiage. Why not? So AI use is also known as creating massive carbon footprint itself. So yeah, what should be done to mitigate the damage? What is being done? How do we make that trade-off make sense? How do we make the balance make sense?
Yeah, so to understand exactly what's the carbon footprint of AI, because it's not AI itself that generates emission, is what is AI? So today in everything that we do, we have emissions on transport, on housing, etc. And AI is just making data centers and servers work and consuming energy. And so the question is, what is this energy that they consume, and are they consuming right? Digital emissions today is like 4% of total emissions, and without AI, it was planned on getting to 7%, so almost doubling by 2030. And now with AI, of course, this can double even or triple. So the question here is, how do we limit the impact of AI? And the answer is the same as how do we limit the impact of everything else that consumes energy, is to create energy that is decarbonated. And so, for example, electricity. I come from France. In France, we have a very healthy energy mix, and so the electricity consumed in France is less carbonated than other places in the world. And so if we move forward with the decarbonation of electricity, those servers and those data centers can work on decarbonated emissions, because I don't think we can say, like, let's just stop AI because it consumes electricity, because there's a lot of other things that we would have to stop then. So I don't think we should stop the progress. We should just make sure that we accelerate the transition as fast as we accelerate the use of this energy. And then, of course, in the way we use AI and in the way we train those models, there's always things we can do to consume less energy. So we have some models, and maybe you can talk more about it, that are more frugal and that consume less in the way they are built and the way they are used, which also helps in the short term while we electrify everything.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. Is that something you're thinking about, the differences between different models, or are there other ways that you're thinking about the actual emissions impact of the tools that you're using?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a distinction here between sort of, the general surge in the use of generative AI versus the use of AI tools for sustainability goals, which is a very small fraction. That's not like, I'm not an expert. I can't really tell you, whether overall, I think this is sort of the question I have. Overall, does, this sustainability angle that AI can be used for offset that surge in electricity use, I can't really speak to that. But I would say is, first of all, the electricity use specifically for, efficiency gains in facilities or for kind of scope 3 estimation, I don't know, I don't have a number, but I would expect that's a tiny fraction of the overall Gen AI that's going on when you compare it to training autonomous vehicles or something like that. I mean, that's a totally different story. Practically how we think about this is exactly like you said, the model choice. So we're using open source models, relatively small ones, and we run them locally at the moment. So and you can do that if you engineer your pipelines in a very specific way, such that the data gets gets organized in a really useful way for the LLM to then not have to do too much work on top of it. So yeah, I hope that gives some color to that
absolutely.
very question.
I think it's a big question for everyone, right? It's something that, like I said, a lot of people I've been talking about here today. And yeah, I think, with our last maybe few minutes here, I'd love to open some questions to the floor. If anyone else wants to ask our panelists any questions of their own. I think we should have a microphone somewhere. Anyone? No? Yeah, there we go. Right in the front.
Hey, hello. Yeah, this is a question on engaging suppliers and helping to reduce those scope 3 emissions. You mentioned you can either trade out those suppliers for other options, or you can try to engage them on ways to actually reduce their total output. And you mentioned some tools that could be used there. Like, could you give some more insight into what those tools are and those processes for engaging those suppliers?
I mean, I know my tool. I know that we have a lot of companies in our space that are working on that too. But today we help sustainable procurement responsibles to engage their supply chain by creating those calculators for their suppliers, so that the supplier can only import whatever they have, a bill of material, the data that they know about their product. They don't need to be expert in carbon. They just need to know what their business, their product is, and they import that in those calculators, which can give a fair assessment of the emissions. And then when you want to go one step further for decarbonation, you can also think about, okay, then what in the data that you provided is what weighed a lot in carbon. So if you know that it's the transport of the raw materials that has a very big carbon impact, then okay, you know that that's the place you have to focus to change and to reduce your emissions. And so you can do scenarios. Okay, if I source my material closer to my factory, then are my emissions lower? And yes, and so then you can make decisions based on your activity and the calculator and the emission factors that are provided by the tool for you.
Thank you. Yeah. Any other questions in the crowd? Okay, well then I'll just ask one more to round us out. Yeah, I would, from a very pragmatic, where you sit specifically in your role, I just want to ask each of you, what you see as kind of the biggest barrier. I mean, we talked a lot about scale, and I mean the barrier for you individually to making scale work. What would you say that is?
You want to start?
I didn't think about that, but I think what is the blocker is that people know the old world where everything was very manual, very complex, etc. And so when talking to suppliers who are less mature in terms of carbon, it's hard for them to imagine that they can do what we were doing in the old world. And I think it's time to realize that there are those tools, there are these technologies that help even the less mature and the smaller supplier to be engaged in the transition. And so we should not be shy of pressuring the supply chain, of course, positively into our engagements, because now they have everything they need to get in there. And so this new world that we're going into is a world where everybody can measure their emissions, and so we should be able to convey that to the supply chain and not restrict ourselves because we're thinking yeah, but they cannot do what I do because I have a team of 15 people for my GHG report only. So of course I can report, but they cannot because it's not their expertise.
Thank you. And anything you want to add to that? What about you specifically?
Well, I think when even on your first question, the key thing I always think about is, okay, how can we stand behind what we do? And where does the LLM fit in there? In terms of resources, I mean, I think with all the open source models, etc., it's actually remarkably cheap to experiment, to figure things out. I think the two key things that are going to be really important is how do you experiment smartly? How do you understand and how do you track progress in terms of how you're using AI in those kind of processes, and then ultimately how can you? It's essentially a verification point. How can you verify that the performance is good enough for you to actually stand behind what it's producing? Or if you have sort of a co-pilot or agent kind of model, how do you enable the researcher to work close enough with the model and being able to follow the model output exactly where it's pulling from, and its evidence, etc., such that you can stand behind it. So I feel like the frameworks around how you think about that is sort of the key challenge.
Yeah, big questions to answer, but I think we're just about at time now, and I just wanted to say thank you both so much for all those insights, and please join me in thanking our panelists.
Thank you.